Good morning, Louis.
Good morning, McGraw. How are you?
So they found the bodies in this compartment this morning?
Well, what we're hearing from the Navy's top admiral in the Pacific that yes, Navy divers went in earlier today into the flooded compartments and found some sets of remains of those 10 missing sailors. Additionally, the Malaysian Navy has also told us that they have found one body at sea in the area where they were looking for those missing sailors. The transfer of that body is underway right now, and the U.S. Navy is going to try to determine if, in fact, this is one of the 10 missing sailors. But the Navy divers went into the flooded compartments and found some of those remains. Very similar to what happened with the USS Fitzgerald. That was the collision just 2 months ago off the coast of Japan, where 7 sailors were killed in that collision. And all 7 of those remains were found inside the flooded compartments of their sleeping quarters.
We'll get to.
So this is one of the areas actually that was also struck in the McCain collision.
What happened with this USS John McCain? This is the 4th accident of the year. Was this any different than the other ones? And what happened here?
Well, the similarity between these 4 incidents is that they all took place in Asia, where the U.S. Pacific Fleet operates. And most of them have actually taken place off of Japan, involving U.S. ships that operate in those waters because they're based there permanently. 3 of those 4 involved some of those ships that were based in Japan. We had one of them involved another collision at sea involving a cruiser and a fishing vessel in the Sea of Japan. That's the body of water between South Korea and Japan. And then another ship, a cruiser, ran aground back in February. So when you have a series of accidents like that, and particularly when they happen all in the same area, that's going to be of concern, and that's why yesterday the Navy's top admiral ordered a review of operations there at the U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet to try to see if there is something systemic underway, if they're going to look at whether a high level of operations that they maintain there, because there are so many of the Navy's ships operate there. 200 of its almost 300 ships operate there. That's a lot of activity, and they want to see whether potentially there's something more going on in terms of the quality of the operations of its officers and sailors. They want to see whether they need to reinforce training, whether they need to reinforce navigational skills, because when you have a series of accidents like that, it's a big concern, and that's why they're undertaking that review right now.
Are we sure they're accidents and they're not some type of terrorist attack against some of these ships?
No, very good question. That was actually something that was posed at Admiral Scott Swift. He's the head of U.S. Pacific Command just about an hour ago. He held a news conference in Singapore, and he was asked whether there may have been something wrong with the steering aboard the ship, whether there may be some cyber sabotage, and he said he had not seen any indications of cyber sabotage, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to rule it out. But at the same time, he kind of seemed to downplay that notion. But he said that everything is being looked at to see whether there's mechanical issues, whether there's anything else that may have contributed to this collision, because it's really rare to have collisions at sea, and particularly in these congested waterways, because U.S. Navy warships, when they're at sea, they maintain low operational profiles, but when they're entering a harbor like this, they have their transponders on so that they're visible to commercial vessels that might be around them. They want to avoid any possibility of a collision in a congested waterway. So when you have 2 incidents like this back-to-back, obvious concerns, and they want to make sure that they get to the bottom of this. And that's one reason why the Navy is also ordering this operational pause. They're going to stand down for safety reasons, reinforce training worldwide across the fleet. So 1 or 2 days where Navy vessels are just going to stop, and they're going to reinforce the sailors and their officers what the importance of safety, and particularly make sure that their training is up to date to avoid these kinds of encounters.
What happened to the oil tanker?
The oil tanker did not suffer much damage, and the crew of the ship is being interviewed in Singapore right now. I've seen some pictures that show almost nothing happened to that ship. This is a ship that's about 3 or 4 times as big when you look at the metric tons involved, but the damage that it caused to the much smaller McCain is very visible. You can see the indentation that bulbous bow from the tanker caused to the destroyer. So it looks pretty significant. And actually what we heard from the Navy today was that ship, the heroic efforts from the sailors to keep that ship at sea, because, again, very serious situation. The ship was listing after the collision, and the sailors aboard really saved it from going down.
They saved the USS McCain.
Yeah, they really did.
Wow.
Because they had to contain the flooding, and that righted the ship up within an hour. So that thankfully, some of the 4 or 5 sailors who were injured were able to be medevac via helicopter back to Singapore.
Louis Martinez, ABC News correspondent in Washington. Thanks, Louis.
Thank you.
7-11.